My wife and I met on a hiking trip, after we were convinced by each of our friends to come along. We instantly knew we wanted to do this more often. As soon as we met, she gave me butterflies. She was outgoing and outdoorsy, confident but anxious about getting close to other people. She told me she had some past boyfriends that broke her trust. Hiking with the same group of people in the spring, summer, or fall was great for her and me. After the first hike, we started going on dates. We got married nearly 3 years later. We were married for 3 years, and during our marriage we hiked with that same group of friends, which consisted of Clay, his brother, and 3 girls. Working full-time sucked us away for a while. Before we knew it, it had been 3 months since we hiked with our friends in the spring, and if we didn't hurry, we'd miss the whole summer. The last time we went, I noticed my wife talking and laughing with Clay more than she ever had before. Usually she stuck pretty close to 2 of the girls and me. I'd like to say I didn't pay it any mind, but it bothered me, and maybe that's why I avoided hiking for a while. I noticed my wife was texting him, but when I asked why she was, she said I didn't need to be immature or jealous. I told her that was just something she could say to defend herself. Then she told me that Clay was already seeing someone. I didn't think this was true, and just seemed like a clever way to get me to leave her alone about it. A week after that, so still about 3 months since she started talking to Clay all the time, she said she wanted to go hiking with the crew again that weekend and camp on Friday night. I thought it was awfully convenient for her to bring this up after I told her I had to work this weekend because my boss insisted. I specifically had to work Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. She told me it was moving away the week after, and wouldn't be able to hike with us anymore. So then I felt bad and was pressured to allow my wife to go with her, and the rest of the group without me. We'd known them for years, so I didn't think she'd run off with Clay, who'd apparently just come out of the closet. So she left Friday just before my shift at work. I got home late, super lonely, and went to work the next morning. I wanted to call her or text, but she didn't have a signal in the woods. There were a few spots we set up camp before, just off the trail in certain recognizable areas. No service anywhere. I got home Saturday and anxiously waited for her to return. When 7 p.m. rolled around, I was annoyed. They weren't supposed to camp another night. I called Clay and his brother first, but they didn't answer. I called each of the girls and they all answered. They all told me the same story, that they got home around 2 p.m. and assumed my wife was gonna head home too, but she was still at the site when they left. Also, none of the girls were moving. They could have done this hiking trip on a weekend when I was off. I was getting more disheartened as the night went on. I wondered if she got lost in the woods. Then Clay's brother called me back. He said his brother was home, sleeping, and my wife stayed behind to camp with one of the girls another night. I told him that lie wouldn't work because I already knew all 3 girls were home. He was speechless for a minute, but then played it off like his memory might have been foggy, or maybe the girl changed her mind. He asked me if my wife would camp by herself for a night, and I told him she wouldn't. I demanded and pressured him for the truth, knowing he was trying to hide something. He caved in and admitted she was at their house, with Clay in his room. I drove straight to his house. Clay's brother let me in, but begged me to go easy on him. I opened the door and found my wife on top of him. I had prepared myself on the car ride over that this was going to be bad, but it was different actually seeing it. They struggled to get off each other quickly, and my wife acted like I was intruding on her special night. I couldn't believe my ears as she said I had no right to hunt her down and just walk in on them. I called her a very insulting name that is usually given to women who sleep around. I told her she was cheating on me, but I felt stupid even having to spell it out for her. I should have every right to prove myself a good man and find her. It means I care, which is more than I'd expect from her. It was like she thought I was stupid or wouldn't try to look for her when she didn't return from a camping trip. Then she said Clay convinced her I'd never find out, and even got his brother to lie for us. That's when Clay spoke up and said it was her that started coming on to him, even while I was hiking 10 feet behind them. My wife looked at him like she wanted to strangle him. AP apologized to me and said he made a mistake. He wanted to start making it right immediately by telling me the truth. I just asked him to give us some space. He left the room and my wife tried to say nothing even really happened. I knew right then that I didn't want to say another word to her, and it wouldn't matter if I did. I wish her luck finding another place to live and left the house. I knew my wife didn't have her car, so AP would probably have to give her a ride somewhere at the least. I just didn't care. I wanted karma to work however it needed to. She started living at Clay's house, but it only lasted a week. He felt bad for what he did to me by taking my wife, and just because she did it with him didn't mean he had to house her. He told me she really planned to stay in the woods with him, but didn't want the police to start searching for them there if I reported her missing. When he kicked her out, I thanked him for it and for trying to make this right. It helped me to realize it wasn't my fault, and I could get through it. I found a new group of friends to go fishing with instead of the hikers. I enjoy it a lot because it doesn't remind me of her. Feels like adventure and change. She completely betrayed me, but didn't get to live happily ever after. She lived with one of the hiking girls, the only friend she had left. This girl didn't want her there after a short while and started making life a little harder for her, like eating her groceries and parking behind her car in the driveway instead of on the street. She actually messaged me and told me I dodged a bullet, even if I was with her for 6 years. My ex started trying to date again, and she hated it so much that she kicked her out after annoying the heck out of her. OP, it is terrible that your wife chose to be with another man that you both trusted for years. If you develop trust issues with guy friends around your significant other, it would be her fault. A little bit his fault too, and even his brother's because he tried to lie for them as well. This was a sad story to hear because there was more than just one betrayal. You did the right thing by calling people and going to look for her. Imagine if you hadn't and she just came home and lied. You needed to know she was doing this so you could have the chance to find someone that actually loves you. I don't feel like she would have jumped to your side in times of trouble. Instead, she probably would have tried to blame you for something. Anything to make it seem like she didn't screw up, but could also get what she wanted. I believe you will find someone 1,000 times better than your ex. Keep following your instincts and have faith that things will work out. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into the next story for today. My wife, 29, and I, 34, were married for 5 years. We met at a New Year's Eve party hosted by her father. She had one sister who used to be friends with me. After I started dating her sister, our relationship diminished. I don't think it was because she was upset. I knew she was glad her sister married me. She knew I was a good man. But there just wasn't as much motivation for us to continue a close relationship like that. During the time we were married, my wife was working at the same place and did great work. She was anxiously awaiting a promotion and big raise. That day finally came and she was ecstatic. When she got home that night after work, she was super pleased with herself. We went on a road trip as soon as the money started to come in, and that was the best memory I have of her. When we got back, things started to change. And I didn't know it at the time, but something had already changed before we went on a road trip. She continued working, but she started coming home and acting strange. She avoided eye contact, especially when I asked her how work went, and even though we used to cook dinner together every night, she started to insist that I work on my project or do something else while she cooked. This went on for a week, and then one night we were in bed and I started taking off her panties. She immediately started crying. It was obviously a red flag. When I asked what was going on, she didn't even try to lie. It's like the sentence of truth was already formed in her mind, like a cat in a bag instead of words in her head. She said her boss finally offered her the raise and promotion on one condition. I held my breath as she told me she had sex with him. I just started crying. I was surprised because I never cry. I think I was really shocked because I didn't see this coming, and we just got back from our road trip. She cried too and told me she did this because she thought it would better our lives and bring us closer together. As long as I never found out, and it was just once. I told her I would have given all the money in the world for her not to do this. She started crying harder and whined that she knew that, and she made a huge mistake. I asked her if this was just a one-time event, and she hesitated before saying yes. I let that go in the moment because I knew it didn't even matter if she slept with him more than once. Once was enough. I said if she wanted to make it up to me, she had to help me get her boss fired. The color left her face and she said she didn't want to. I told her it's the only way she can make this right. She asked how we could get him fired. I told her to get proof that there was infidelity by exposing his text messages. She told me that she did what she had to for my proof, but she still expected forgiveness. In the hopes it would help me forgive her, then she asked me to type out the email to her boss so we could get him fired and I could start forgiving her. I told her I never planned to forgive her for this. I already filed for divorce. Around the same time, she was getting her proof of infidelity for me. I told her I wouldn't trust her with a pet goldfish anymore, let alone my heart. She never should have accepted any amount of money for cheating on me. I told her she actually deserved that promotion without sleeping with him because she worked hard. She started crying again as I told her that she could have gone to headquarters about his unlawful and degrading request, but instead she gave him what he wanted, and perhaps because she wanted it too. She could have been honorable and behaved like the lady her father raised her to be. Taking a sleazy offer like this and believing I'd never found out, told me she didn't deserve me or know what it means to be a respectable person. She was shocked that I didn't plan on forgiving her, which is why she got me proof to fire her boss. She didn't know I was also going to mention her name and request she be fired too, because she spoke to coworkers about it and made them uncomfortable. I told her to get out, but she begged me to at least let her sleep on the couch. I told her I couldn't afford the temptation of having her near me. She betrayed me, so I couldn't allow her near me. She needed to suffer the consequences. She left, but it was difficult. I wasn't sure if I need to call the police to get her out, but I didn't think they'd get involved like that since she was on the deed too. She had the option to tell her father I was leaving her, and he'd give her a place to stay. That's exactly what she did, but she really didn't want to tell him why I left her. He called me to find out, so I told him. He was extremely embarrassed and ashamed. Her mother cheated on him years ago, so he raised her as best he could to understand how terrible it is to do that to someone. He was so embarrassed that he didn't tell any of their family members or friends that his daughter had moved in with him again. Both my ex-wife and AP were fired from their jobs and divorced. AP didn't even trust her enough to continue seeing her, because she filmed him without his knowledge and made him lose his job. I'd say everything turned out as it should have in my situation. I started dating again, but I'm not going to quickly attach to anyone, and maybe that's for the better. OP, I am so sorry your wife thought it was okay to sleep with her boss for a promotion. It's completely wrong, and she should have respected herself and you more than that. Like you said, there was a different, more honorable route that she could have taken. It means that she did not care what her father taught her, how her mother broke his heart, or about you. You most certainly did the right thing by kicking her out and refusing to stay married. I'm glad she couldn't keep her shameful secret hidden. The truth always comes out, but even before it does, karma begins. I thank you for sharing this story so that others may be encouraged and understand what must be done if they're in this situation. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care and thanks again. I am 35 and my ex-wife, Emily, is 30 as of the time I write this story. Emily and I had been married for more than 5 years, and I loved her so much. The truth is, we go a long way back as we grew up in the same community and attended the same school at a particular point in our lives. I was way ahead of her in class, and though we weren't together like the typical high school lovers, we met when I was in my late 20s. We dated and broke up a couple of times, but in the end we realized we could not stay without each other because we were so deeply in love. I worked for a top construction company, and because of my busy schedule, I was barely at home to spend time with my ex-wife. She complained a couple of times, but she knew I was out there making money and trying to close deals so I could afford the kind of lifestyle she wanted. Emily was a remote worker. She worked from home, and her job kind of gave her enough time to do the things she liked, hang out with her friends, and she could even afford to put off her work for a couple of hours to watch her favorite television shows. But it was not so for me if I wasn't inspecting a particular site or trying to buy an old house for renovation. I was working on site, and by the time I came back home I would be so exhausted, and this went on for a while. I tried to make it up to Emily as much as I could during the weekend. We'd go out, just the two of us, jump on a mini vacation whenever we could, and I bought her expensive stuff just as my way to make up for my unavailability. She loved all of those things, and she understood that I was doing the most to make her happy. We didn't have a child yet because she said she was not ready to be a mom, and besides, she wanted me to make more money so our child could have the best life, get a good education, and not have to struggle as we did in the early stages of our lives. Though I tried to talk to her a lot of times about it. I even explained to her that they were people who were not earning as much as we did, but they had a comfortable family, and they were all happy. But she kept insisting that when the time was right, she would let me know, so I backed off. All along, I did not know that Emily was having an affair behind me, and she was so good at hiding it. It all began when I came home a bit early from work one day, and she was preparing to go to a meeting. She had her makeup on, wore a beautiful blue tight dress, released her blonde hair, and wore a pair of black heels. That did not look like an ideal meeting outfit to me, but I shook it off. When she returned home that evening, she was covered in a strong masculine cologne, and when I asked her about it, she said she hugged a couple of people after the meeting, and she could not tell where the cologne came from. I bought that too and let it slide. But she raised my suspicions when she declined our mini vacation just because she wanted to be a part of her girls' hangout, which could have been rescheduled, and she claimed she had more reunion meetings to attend. I understood that she was the treasurer of her class, but it just did not make any sense for her to turn down traveling with me for a school reunion meeting and her girls' hangout. She knew how much I worked my ass off, and she knew I was not going to be getting a long break anytime soon, and besides, it had been months since we spent quality time together. So, after she attended her meetings 3 times that week alone, I knew something was off and I decided to find out. On that particular day, she said she was going on a girls' night out with her friends, but she would be sleeping at one of her friends' houses that night. I knew Emily was a social butterfly. She just wanted to be a part of everything, but my instincts told me she was lying. She showed no iota of concern about leaving me at home, despite knowing that I really wanted to be with her. The funny thing was, she spent the whole day picking out what to wear, and was more concerned about her looks than the outing itself, which was very unlike her. I had a backup phone, and I left it in her car while I pretended to see her off that evening. It was hard for me if I had to be sure I wasn't making things up in my head. Some minutes after she left, I phoned one of her friends and told her that I wanted to surprise Emily that night, and I asked where they'd be hanging out, but from the way she sounded confused on the phone, it was obvious there was no girls' night out, and Emily lied to me. A part of me wanted to let it slide, and another part of me needed to know what was going on. I followed my tracker, and it led me to a fancy restaurant far from her friend's house, where they were all supposed to meet up. I must say that stepping out of my car to see Emily cuddled and being fed by her high school sweetheart was stomach-wrecking for me that night. I recognized him instantly. He was a guy that went to the same high school as us. I knew she was up to something, but I was definitely not expecting to see her with David, of all people. Anyways, I did not create a scene, I just made sure she saw me, and I walked back to my car. The moment she saw me, she ran after me. But I drove off, and I was thinking she'd drive after me immediately, but she didn't. I got home before she did, and I didn't hesitate to throw her things out of the house. By the time she returned, she was a complete mess. Her eyelids were swollen from crying, and she tried to beg me to forgive her and give her a second chance, but that was the worst form of betrayal. I asked her to go back to David, and that's when she flipped and told me she was leaving anyway. She said I wasn't giving her attention, barely spent time with her, she didn't feel loved, and David was a better man than I was. She even told me she was pregnant for David, and she even wanted to do me a favor and tell me the child was mine. Unfortunately, I had enough for one night, so I asked her to give to David what belonged to David, and I threw her out. A couple of months later we divorced, and by then her baby bump was so visible. It didn't take long before David ghosted her, and she had to deal with the baby all by herself, pay for her rent, and do multiple jobs just to get things going. To even think that I never asked her to contribute to the rent or some of the bills at home. I paid all of them by myself and I never complained, yet she never appreciated any of that. It was her loss because I did all I could to treat her right and I was faithful. But I have moved on now, though it was hard, but I know I'm going to be open to being with someone better pretty soon. Obi, I agree with you. She had to give to David what belonged to him, and I'm glad you did not fall into the trap of giving her a second chance. And to think that she did not even show remorse and went ahead to compare you with her lover, that is pathetic. I understand that you loved her, but she didn't, because if she loved you, she would never want to hurt you or even get pregnant with another man's baby. As you said, it's the worst form of betrayal. Take some time to work on yourself and find peace with what happened. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's now get into our next story for today. Hello, I'm sharing this story because my ex-wife, April 26 female, messed up big time. When April and I got married, she swore that nothing was going to come between us, and I believed her. Our love was young, we had just been married, and it wasn't up to 2 years, though we dated for a few years before getting married. Because of our beliefs, our marriage was the kind of relationship where we did not get intimate before marriage, so after we got married, it was a lot of exploring for the both of us. The first few months of our marriage were awesome. We made love almost every day, and that's because I could not get enough of her. She was crazy about me and I was crazy about her too. And despite our busy work schedule, we always found ways to maximize our moments together. April worked part-time at a bakery, and I worked at a tech company. Right from when we met, she always told me how she wanted to work at a bakery and possibly own hers one day. I was the one who advised her to leave her job since it was not paying so much, and do the things she loved, and she listened. Because of her passion and consistency after we got married, she was lucky to get a baking contract from one of her friends who needed her to bake and sell pastries every Tuesday. The contract was a juicy one and she took it. Before she got the contract, we used to spend more time together on Monday evenings talking about our day at work and the rest. But since selling at her friend's talk show was an every week thing, April and I became distant. It wasn't just about Monday nights anymore. She just changed and paid less attention to me. If she wasn't baking, she'd either be on her phone, or she was just not paying attention to me like she used to. Slowly, our intimacy reduced. She would always claim she was not in the mood, even when she knew how much I loved to make love to her. As if all of these were not enough, I noticed that April stayed out late on Monday nights, and if I asked her why, she'd say she went grocery shopping for the next day, and sometimes she would pick a fight with me over it. Funnily enough, whenever she returned from her grocery shopping by 10 p.m., she'd come home with a very small bag, and since I was familiar with her baking ingredients, I knew most of them did not need refilling as she claimed. At first, I tried to understand her because she returned from the bakery, where she worked by 6 p.m., and she did not have time during the day to go shopping, but when she began to stay out late several times on Monday nights, and would return with almost nothing in the bag, I knew something was wrong. It was more suspicious when she'd even come back and go straight to the bathroom with her phone, which she rarely did, then ignore me till the next day. It became more frustrating that I'd return home by 7 p.m., and she'd leave almost 30 minutes after, without a good reason, and would still stay out till 1 a.m. When I could not take it anymore, I hired a private investigator to follow her on her Monday nights. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. The PI returned with pictures of April and a man, whose name was Alex, and they'd hang out together until she drove back home. There were pictures of them kissing, hugging each other, kissing in the car, and even pictures of her going into his house. The PI followed her for 3 Mondays just to be sure. When he gave them to me, I was devastated. Our marriage was barely 2 years old, and she was already cheating on me. I was so pained and I could not believe what my eyes had seen. I wouldn't have imagined spending the rest of my life with someone else, but April ruined all of the vows we made to each other. I wanted to pay her back, and that's when I came up with the perfect plan. Her birthday was just around the corner and coincidentally it was on a Monday too. Before I left to work on her birthday, I told her I would not return home early, but I would make it up to her during the weekend and she agreed. Meanwhile, I already made preparations for a surprise party, and her friends and family were coming in with cakes, gifts, and drinks for her. That evening we all went to my apartment by 8 p.m. I texted her about an hour earlier and apologized again, so she had no clue any of us were coming home. I had my house key, so accessing the house was easy. Everyone went in, the light was off, and there was loud music playing in the background, so she didn't hear us come in. My PI already informed me that she was home with Alex, so it was well planned, and everything turned out the way I wanted it to. Aside from the house being dark, the light in our room was on, and the door was partially closed. Her mom was the first to get to the door, and immediately, she opened it in a bid to surprise her. She stood at the entrance in shock, and the cake fell off her hands. Her sister screamed too, and her dad began to shout. April was caught red-handed on top of Alex, naked and pleasuring themselves. It all happened so fast, and before she could get up and cover herself, everyone had seen her. I acted surprised as well, but deep down I wasn't. I knew it wasn't the first time they were screwing each other. Her best friend Anna was there, and from the look on her face, she did not expect to see April like that. Anna tried to push people out of the corridor, but it was too late. Everyone came to take a peek at April and her lover. I pretended to be so hurt, and I punched Alex until I broke his nose. April's father tried to hold me down, but it wasn't working. April, on the other hand, was confused about who to beg or apologize to. She tried begging me and her parents at the same time, but her parents turned away in shame and left the house. I had to keep my act, so I threw both April and her lover out of the house, and the party was never held. Before her birthday, I had contacted a lawyer and my divorce papers were already on their way. When it was ready, April signed and we parted ways. As I expected, Alex ditched her. He just wanted a fling with her and did not think it would ruin her marriage. Her parents shut the door behind her too, but her best friend took her in for a while, though she was so disappointed. After our divorce, she showed up at my house and stalked me on social media, even after I blocked her. In the end, she got sent a restraining order to stay away from me and stay off my property. Though it was all planned, I still find it hard to get rid of the image of April sleeping with her lover on her matrimonial bed. I miss her most of the time, but I'm glad I learned the truth early. I have moved on now, but I'm not ready for anything serious, and I don't think I'll be anytime soon. April did a horrible thing to you, but even though you humiliated her, no man deserves to get that from his wife. I understand that you loved her so much and planned on spending the rest of your life with her, but you can consider this as a good riddance to a selfish woman. If you didn't find out, she probably would have cheated on you in the future, but I'm glad you found out early, and it was really smart of you to hire a private investigator. It's a good thing her parents were there. You don't have to explain anything to them, and she'll have to live with the disappointment for a very long time. Thank you for sharing your story with us. We are proud that you made the right decision. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife and I have been married for 6 years. We met at work and instantly connected. As employees, we were discouraged from dating others in the office. So, I spent all of my time trying to make her laugh and joking with her about the other people around us. Eventually, I found a new job at a great place, and on my last day in the office I asked her out. She said yes and we fell in love. We got married after about a year and a half of being together, and it was one of the best decisions of our lives. The pandemic happened early on in our marriage, and at first it was causing some stress. We had been used to being away from each other during the work days, and only really seen each other on weekends and evenings. It isn't that we didn't love each other, but we both had our own time for ourselves. The pandemic really got both of us thinking about our health. We were both relatively healthy, we ate well for the most part, and before the pandemic we got most of our exercise from running around our respective offices. However, with the pandemic we were very sedentary and both of us were putting on a little bit of weight. When things started to clear up, we both decided that we wanted to get a gym membership. We went together and we had a good time focusing on this new lifestyle. On top of that, we both really loved exercising, and we could see the benefits of it fairly quickly. We started going to the gym together 3 or 4 times a week. The more we went, the more confident we were. Our membership was at a local place owned by someone we knew, so we recognized a lot of the people at the gym. There was a sense of community there that we liked. One day, while we were driving back from the gym, my wife asked me who my gym crush was. I was taken aback by the question because it seemed like a weird thing for her to ask. She assured me that she wasn't going to take it the wrong way, but she'd seen me paying attention to some of the other girls in the gym, and she was just curious. In fact, she promised to tell me hers. I thought about it for a moment, and I realized that I was confident enough in our relationship to have that conversation with her. Of course, neither of us was the only person we were attracted to. We are both human after all. As long as neither of us acted on those impulses, we were fine. I told her who mine was. We'll call her Heather. Heather went to the gym with her fiancé, and we crossed paths with both of them often. My wife confessed that her crush was Heather's fiancé. We'll call him Joe. We teased each other about it after we confessed, but it was never really something that came up again. Several months later, I was playing basketball with some friends from the neighborhood, and I landed very badly and tore a ligament in my knee. I had to go through some physical therapy alongside months of rest. During those months, I wasn't able to go to the gym with my wife. She was still going, which I had no issues with whatsoever. She had been very passionate about her fitness and activity after the fact, so I was happy she was still doing it. I just wished that I could have gone with her. After the injury, I found myself in a depressive episode. I was trapped in my house for the majority of my time, and I was feeling isolated and alone, so I took up some bad habits. I put on a little bit of weight, and some of the muscle tone that I had earned over the months of going to the gym disappeared. It didn't help my depression that I could see it happening and felt helpless to stop it. I complained about the issues I was having with my body to my wife often, and she did what she could to assure me that it wasn't an issue, and she would love me no matter what. However, her actions spoke differently. It seemed like she didn't want around me as much. She had been laid off during the pandemic and still wasn't working, but she was out all the time running errands. On top of that, we weren't having sex. I took it as her not being attracted to me, but I didn't want to go to her and ask about that. I think a big part of me was too afraid to hear the truth. She started going to the gym more and more, and I started to realize that she was going 5 or 6 times a week, which was more than we had really gone. It definitely seemed like she just wanted to get away from me. Months passed, and I was done with my rest and going to physical therapy to try and get everything back to normal. When I was finally cleared to be off crutches and able to begin light exercise again, I jumped at the opportunity. My wife gladly brought me back to the gym, and everybody else there seemed happy that I was back. I was friendly with just about everybody at the gym. That included Heather and Joe. My first week back, everybody, including Heather, came over to me and asked me all about my recovery and how I was feeling. I didn't notice it at the time, but Joe was steering clear of me. Looking back after I returned to the gym, he and I hadn't had a single conversation with each other. I couldn't remember him talking to my wife either. Because I was still recovering, I wasn't able to go to the gym very often. I had to take it easy and make sure I was giving myself time to recuperate. I was going to the gym every other day for the most part. My wife kept going at her normal pace. I was working from home, so thankfully I was able to step out and take walks or things like that whenever I wanted to, as long as I was getting my work done. My wife told me one morning that she was going to the gym in the afternoon. It was one of my resting days, so I hadn't planned on going with her. Around lunchtime, I was feeling fidgety, like I had a lot of energy that I needed to get rid of. I figured I could take an hour and go cycle or walk on the treadmill, so I made my way over. My wife told me she was going to be there, so I was expected to see her inside when I arrived. I looked around for her, and she was nowhere to be seen. I asked a woman at the front desk if she saw my wife, but she told me that she didn't think she'd come in yet that day. I was worried right away. I trusted my wife, and when she told me she was going to the gym, I believed her. If she wasn't there, and she wasn't at home, she was somewhere between her house and the gym, and somehow she didn't make it there. My mind wandered to the worst-case scenarios, so I rushed back to my car and slowly made the drive home to see if I could spot anything. I didn't see her car in a ditch or anything like that, which eased my mind. I called her when I got back to see where she was, but she didn't answer. I felt completely helpless. In my mind, my wife was being held captive in someone's basement, and there was nothing I could do about it. I waited for about an hour, and then she walked in the front door. She was still in her workout clothes, as if she had gone to the gym when I knew that she hadn't. I asked her where she was, and she told me she was at the gym. Obviously, I knew that she was lying. I just didn't know why. I explained the situation to her, and told her that I didn't see her at the gym, and I was worried. She played it off like she didn't understand why the worker said I wasn't there, suggesting that there might have been a shift change while she was there. She told me that she was in the sauna for a while, which might explain why I didn't see her there. The excuses she gave made sense, but something was telling me not to believe them. I saw with my own eyes that she wasn't there. I was scoring around for her car, and I didn't see it anywhere in the lot at the gym. My wife was lying to me, and my paranoia started taking full control of my brain. Later that night, while she was asleep, I took it upon myself to find out the truth of what was really happening. I grabbed her phone and looked through it for any clues about where she was. I found that within seconds of opening her phone, she was with Joe. Their messages were all pretty tame. There were a few messages where they would tell each other they missed each other, but for the most part it was them planning times to get together. They were hooking up a few times a week. Apparently, Joe worked from home while Heather didn't, so whenever she would leave, my wife would head over to their house. I was completely heartbroken by what I saw, especially when I put the pieces together that their affair started while I was home recovering from my injury and feeling very bad about myself. It seemed like everything I thought about my relationship with my wife was wrong, and it was devastating to learn that. I knew that I needed to divorce her, but while I looked over the text messages, I didn't think it was sufficient evidence to prove that there was an affair. It seemed like there could be something going on, but there wasn't anything in there that explicitly mentioned they were having sex. I needed to see it for myself and get some kind of proof. I did a quick search online for some kind of app, or something I could download on my wife's phone to be able to track her. Sounds awful, but I needed to know when she was actually going to the gym and when she was going to Joe's house. My intention was just to follow her there and make sure I could get the proof I needed. I found one and got it set up so next time she told me she was going to the gym, I could be ready. After 2 days, my wife told me that she was going to the gym. I waited for about half an hour after she left and checked the app. She was not at the gym. I quickly finished up what I was doing with my work, and I made my way over to the address she was at. I walked to the front door and looked at a piece of mail to see that it was Joe's house. My wife's car was in the driveway, so I knew that I was going to be possibly witnessing one of the worst things I could imagine. I realized that I couldn't get into the house, so that posed a bit of a problem for me. I needed to see what was happening, so I did something a little bit illegal. I opened an electric bill belonging to Heather, and I got her phone number from that. I called her and explained everything. She was skeptical at first, but she agreed to head right over to see for herself if I was right about everything. I hid the electric bill in my car, so they would never know that I had to open it to contact her, and I waited for her to arrive. As soon as I saw her, I walked to the door with her. When she opened the front door, the chain lock was up. That immediately made her suspicious. That was never up, so she thought it was him trying to keep her out of the house. We snuck around to the back door and she let us both in through there. When we got in, we could hear music playing from the bedroom and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. All of the signs pointed to my wife having an affair, but there was still part of me that had the slightest bit of hope that I was misreading things. Of course, that wasn't the case. Heather led me to the bedroom where she opened the door to see my wife and Joe together. They were both surprised to see us there. Heather ran up to Joe and started hitting him on the head with her purse. I couldn't blame her for reacting that way. My wife covered herself as quickly as she could and tried to explain herself to me. She told me that it just happened while they were at the gym. She tried to tell me it was the first time anything like that had happened and she regretted it. I told her that I knew she was lying and there wasn't any point in to expect to get divorced. She still hadn't found a job since being laid off from hers during the pandemic. She had gotten quite comfortable with not working, which had been a point of contention in our relationship in the past, but I made enough for us to still live comfortably. She tried to convince me to change my mind about it right there while we were standing in the doorway of the room she was just cheating on me in. I told her that my mind was made up and I was going through with it. She was angry about that, and as I was walking away she told me that she wasn't attracted to me anyway, and that I couldn't ever really satisfy her. I knew the second part was a lie, but the first part of what she said stunned. I had my insecurities about how I looked after the injury, and hearing somebody who was supposed to love you say it wasn't a blast. Heather and I both ended up divorcing our partners, and we wrote letters to each other's divorce attorneys explaining everything that happened since we didn't have any photographic evidence. I kicked my wife out of my house and she ended up moving in with Joe. They were apparently in love with each other and planned on spending the rest of their lives together. They both got married a few months after the divorces were finalized, which I know now that they regret because they're in the process of divorcing. Heather and I talk to each other on occasion and we laugh about how dumb of a decision it was for them to remarry so quickly. From everything I gathered, Joe ended up cheating on my ex-wife with another woman from the gym. That's what sparked their divorce. I'm happy knowing that my ex-wife was forced to get a job and spend a good portion of her earnings paying for 2 separate divorce attorneys. OP, your injury sounds like it was a lot for you to handle, and it seems like your wife wasn't there for you throughout it. You were vulnerable in telling us about your insecurities with your body after everything, and it seems like you expressed that to your wife too. For her to know that and make you feel the way that you did is awful, especially telling you at the end of the relationship that she cheated on you because of that. I think her true colors were clear when she adamantly lied about being at the gym when you knew that she wasn't. You caught her in the lie and yet she's still held to it. Obviously, I doubt she would confess to what she did at the time, but the fact that she kept up a lie like that says a lot about her. It's good that both you and Heather divorced your partners, and I think it is kind of funny that they both got married and divorced so quickly. Joe cheating on your wife is karma for her. I can only hope that Joe gets something back at him sometime soon, and I agree your wife had to pay a lot of money for 2 separate divorce attorneys in a very short amount of time, and that is pretty awful for her. I hope you are taking time to take care of yourself again and feel comfortable in your skin. I know going through something like this with your partner is pretty disheartening, but I do wish that you will find someone in the future who will value you and respect you in a relationship. Now let's move on to our next story. My girlfriend and I met when we were both fresh out of high school. and working in the same grocery store over the summer. We were both going to college out of state, but we lived just one town over from each other. We got to talking while we worked there and we hit it off. I was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to dating, so I didn't realize that she had feelings for me when she did. She ended up asking me out because I was clueless about her feelings toward me. Of course I said yes. I thought she was amazing and I jumped at the first opportunity one had to go out with her. We continued dating through the rest of our college years, occasionally going to visit the other person on weekends or breaks when we had the chance. But we looked forward to those summer breaks when we could spend 3 months with each other virtually uninterrupted. She was my first love and I was completely convinced at the time that she and I were going to be together forever. I know now that was just childish naivety, but I was hopeful. The main reason she went to the university that she did was because they had an incredible study abroad program. I knew that in the summer between her junior year and senior year she was planning on going to London. I knew that from the moment I met her because she was very excited about it. That summer I got to see her for about a week before she flew out to attend her summer program. We still talked often because I wanted to hear all about her travels, so we FaceTimed and texted each other whenever we had the chance. I was happy for her, but I missed her like crazy. I was complaining about it to my parents and they could see how upsetting it was for me, so they offered to pay for a plane ticket to go see her. My girlfriend was excited about it when I told her, and we planned the perfect time to get together so she could show me some of her favorite spots in the city, and we could spend time together. She told me about a lot of the friends that she made while she was in her program. Of course I didn't know every single one of her friends, but from what I gathered it didn't seem like anything was going on. A couple of weeks before I was set to take my trip, she was pretty much MIA in terms of phone calls or responding to my messages. She would check in now and then just to tell me that she was fine, but she wasn't giving me anything else. I had a bad feeling about it, initially thinking that maybe something was going on and she was trying to ghost me, but that didn't seem like something she would do, so I wasn't sure. When it got closer to my date of departure, she was communicating with me a lot more. She told me that she had been stressed out with class stuff and was sort of in a bad place because of it. I felt bad for assuming anything else was going on. I flew to London and she met me at the airport to take me back to the flat she was staying in. She introduced me to a lot of her friends. The only person that she introduced me to that I didn't know about beforehand was a guy that we'll call Dan. I hated being this way, but seeing the guy that I knew was probably hanging out with my girlfriend without me automatically raised some red flags. My girlfriend was beautiful and in my eyes anybody would have been foolish not to want to be with her. However, I quickly picked up on the fact that he was dating another one of my girlfriend's friends who we will call Katie. The two of us went sightseeing the first day that I was there. She showed me some incredible places and we went to some lovely cafes and bookstores. The second day that I was there, we went on a double date with Dan and Katie. There was this fun arcade that we went to, and afterward we went for a walk in a park. Katie and I actually had a lot in common when it came to the video games at the arcade. It was a place that she suggested we all go to because she loved it and my girlfriend and Dan weren't really into things like that. So it might have been a little bit of my fault in this, but I spent the majority of that time talking to her about the games. Dan and my girlfriend were sitting at the table together, and I happened to look over at them at one point to see them smiling and laughing at each other with Dan reaching for her hand. It immediately brought back all the suspicions that I had. When everything was over, I asked my girlfriend about it. She told me that it was nothing and he was just making a joke and he was a touchy person. That didn't make me feel any better. We ended up getting into an argument about it because I felt like she was lying to me. It was difficult because we only had a couple more days together in London before I had to go back to the States and get ready for my senior year. After that, we wouldn't see each other until the winter break. I could tell that she was still upset with me in the morning, but we apologized and decided that we wanted to make the best of the time we would have together. I didn't see Dan or Katie again for the rest of the time I was in London. I got back home and I was bummed with how everything went while I was with her. I went back to school for the first semester of my senior year, and things seemed to be normal between us. We were communicating over the phone like we always did during the semester. I saw her again over the winter break and things were different between us. She was cold and less open to me than she normally was. By that time I wasn't thinking about the argument we had, and I genuinely didn't understand why she was acting the way that she was. Whenever we would talk, it would always be about things not related to us. Specifically, she would always tell me about things that were going on in the group chat she had with the people that she met in London. I know she adored all of them and she considered them to be very close friends. She was contemplating moving to London after graduation and getting an apartment with them. I spent New Year's Eve with her and I noticed that she didn't want to be around me much. We were at a party at a bar in her hometown and around midnight I went to find her to kiss her when the ball dropped. Just as I was about to kiss her, she turned her face away from me, so I kissed her cheek. I was surprised, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. When we got back to her house after everything, I asked her about it. My gut was telling me that she did it because she didn't want to commit to me for a year, and it was some superstition that she had. She made it seem like I was looking into it too much. I slept over at her house that night, but I couldn't get the idea of it out of my mind. We had been drifting apart for some time and I didn't want to lose her, but it felt like I was. It was about 3 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. I was just lying in bed next to her and I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand showing Dan's name. From my understood, they didn't talk to each other much aside from group settings. Seeing him reach out to her was confusing. I quietly grabbed her phone and read the message. He wished her a happy New Year's and said that he was sorry for not being her midnight kiss. That prompted me to look through their other messages, where I saw that they had been exchanging pictures and videos of each other for months. From some of the context, I clearly understood that they had been sleeping together while she was in London. I knew that I was right to be suspicious about what was happening with Dan. My gut told me something was going on with them, and my girlfriend lied to me when I asked her about it. I didn't see any way that I could continue being with her after what happened, and it didn't seem like she wanted to make it work either. I sent myself screenshots of their messages so I would have them, and I left. I didn't tell her about what I was doing and I didn't give her any heads up that I knew about her and Dan. I just left and didn't tell her anything. She was going to be wondering what happened for a little while. I didn't talk to her for the rest of the break, even though she messaged me a few times wanting to get together before we left for our final semesters. I went back to school and continued ignoring her. I could tell from her messages that she was hurt by my completely ghosting her, which I was thankful for. She hurt me and I wanted her to be hurt back, but I also wanted to do something else. I didn't feel like it was enough to get back at her for how she hurt me. I stood on it for a while and eventually decided to reach out to her friends from London and let them know what my girlfriend had been doing with Dan. I threw all of them in a group chat and I explained everything, sending screenshots of the evidence to them. I didn't respond much in the chat, but it blew up with all of them expressing how shocked they were and telling me how sorry they were for me. On top of that, they kept mentioning how there were signs all along, but they didn't want to believe it. Dan's girlfriend Katie was in that chat and she was talking about how she was going to make him regret what he did. Surprisingly, they didn't kick me out of the group chat. I was in it and they kept checking in with me to see how I was doing. They seemed like a solid group of people. From what they told me, they all stopped talking to my girlfriend because they couldn't stand her for what she did. My girlfriend reached out to me after she found out what happened and told me that I had no business going through her phone. Her main point was that I invaded her privacy and ruined her plans for after graduation. She couldn't afford to live in London on her own, so she had no way of making that dream come true. Katie got her revenge on Dan by sleeping with his brother. Normally I wouldn't condone behavior like that, but it was pretty funny. Not only did she break up with Dan, but she potentially ruined his relationship with his sibling. I guess that was one way to get revenge. Now I have graduated and that was a couple of years in the past. I'm not close friends with any of those girls from that group chat, but we're still friendly. I do know that if I ever end up in London again, I can hang out with a couple of them and we can have a nice little reunion. OP. I'm so sorry I had to go through all of that. It seems like your girlfriend might have been feeling guilty when she wasn't talking to you for that week before you arrived. I could understand if she was feeling panicked about the possibility of you coming into contact with Dan. Their demeanor in the bar definitely clued me into the affair they were having. They must have just forgotten that they were there with their partners and were acting like it was a date. I always think it's interesting when people take their partners on double dates with their affair partners. There must be some level of false confidence involved that makes them think that they can get through that without any signals. It's good that you cut her off completely. It's better to do that than try to give her a chance to sway your mind to stay with her. I'll never understand why somebody who is unhappy in a relationship will stay in it and cheat rather than do the right thing and end the relationship before moving on. Breakups are tough, but they are worlds better than being cheated on. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. One quality I 40 admired in my wife 44 was her enthusiasm for holidays. She said whenever she gathered with others to celebrate, it felt warm, fuzzy, and magical. Easter was no exception. She loved dyeing eggs and taking the kids on Easter egg hunts. Even though our twins grew to be too old for Easter egg hunts, she maintained her holiday routine. In preparation for Easter, she collected and boiled our chickens' eggs, dyed them, usually with the help of our sons, and used them in the egg hunt for the younger kids at the church. Besides basically hosting the church event, she also planted a large combination of daffodils, crocus, and hyacinth seedlings. She had at least 200 flowers ready for sale 9 days before Easter. She transported them with her econoline from the grow tent in the backyard to her selling spot on the corner by the supermarket. I helped her with this project every year, including last year's Easter holiday, when unbeknownst to me she met AP. There were no clues that she was communicating with another romantic partner. She would just so casually tell me she was talking to her mother. I did not get along with my MIL. She drove me crazy, but I tolerated her for my wife and children's sake. By this Easter, our twins were 15 years old, so they didn't exactly jump up to go to Grandma's house, thank goodness. I had a reason to stay home now. How could I have known I couldn't trust my wife when she told me she was talking to her mother or going to see her mother? On this Easter Sunday, my wife already had the eggs hidden for the children to find in the grass and trees behind the church. The teenagers wanted to stay home, and since my wife told me her mother was going to be at the church, probably close to my wife, I elected to stay home. About 30 minutes after my wife left, her mom called the house phone. I was a little concerned, so I answered it. It became clear that she never intended to join the Easter egg hunt this year. She was calling to see if my wife could come over after church to clip her toenails. I shuddered and hung up, since I distinctly remembered her telling me her mother would be there. My hunch told me something was up. I let my teenagers stay home and went to the egg hunt. I spotted my wife standing alone, watching the children hunt for eggs. I walked over to her, and as soon as I greeted her, I saw panic in her eyes. She kept glancing at the church building, like she expected someone to come out any minute. She quickly asked me why I was there, but before I answered, she told me her mother would be back out from the restroom any minute, so I should go back home. I calmly and grudgingly told her that I already knew her mom wasn't here. Her face and neck turned red, and she started itching until she saw a man come out of the church and start heading towards us. She quickly told me the man headed our way was just a friend that wanted to date her, but she already told him she was married. I was confused and hardly had time to think before he asked me if I was the reason she ghosted him the past week. I said excuse me and then told him she was my wife and we were married for the past 19 years. He was immediately deflated and told me they'd been seeing each other for a year. I was taken aback. It felt like the wind was knocked out of me. She told me that wasn't true, and that he'd been harassing her to the point where she considered calling the police. I just looked at her like she was crazy, and asked how that could have been happening without me knowing. AP called her a liar, and demanded she tell me about their plans for the future. When she covered her face, he grabbed her wrist to move her hand, and without thinking, I pushed him in an attempt to stop him from touching her. This resulted in us fighting. I remember getting a few punches in before I blacked out. When I came to, the police were there, and many of the egg hunting children were gone, left in a hurry with their families because of the brawl. I was seen in an ambulance, and it was concluded I had a concussion. The police told me what I already found out. My wife was cheating on me. The word got around fast from people that went to our church and she was pretty much shunned by all of them. As far as I know, she was practically banned from ever stepping foot in that church again. I couldn't imagine my wife willingly seeing a man, even planning a future with him, all behind my back. Felt like a nightmare. It came to light that he had a child from a previous marriage, who was present at the egg hunt that my wife invited them to. AP told me that he was ending things with her, as well since he had no idea she was married. He mentioned that she begged him not to leave her, and said that she told him I was abusive, which was completely made up. It was disturbing to me how my wife could sabotage our entire family all by one idiotic decision. This was enough to end everything we had together as a family, and it broke my heart. The kids and I didn't deserve this. I read posts about this in the past, but since I never did anything to betray my wife's trust, discourage her, or disappoint her. I never thought she would have a reason to cheat on me. I was just dumb for failing to realize this would happen to me. OP, I am so sorry you and your sons had to go through this. I want you to know it was absolutely no fault of yours. She lied about you being abusive to make it look like she was only doing what any other battered woman would do. Leave the bad man and find a new love. The only problem is she didn't leave you, and you didn't deserve to be left. She just found a new love, lied, and pretended everything was fine to your face. She tried to justify leaving her family after 19 years by portraying you as a bad spouse. You must realize that this happens to men who least expect it every day, so you aren't dumb for failing to realize her deception. Just stay strong for your sons, and remember that you can make the best of this life change. Stay hopeful and remain honest in your relationships. There are honest and good women out there who are looking for a respectable man. Get out there, be honest, and find as many things as you can to be passionate about. I wish you the best of luck in life. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I were chefs in a gourmet kitchen in New York City. We knew each other for 14 years and were married for 9. We enjoyed every day together, working nearly identical shifts at the restaurant. Ratatouille was our favorite movie because our hats were identical. A year after the movie, I actually adopted 2 pet rats as a joke for my wife. She loved them. She told me months later she didn't know she could get so attached to rodents. Anyway, our relationship was great and full of imagination and happy times. After our passed away, we decided to conceive. When we struggled to do so, we took it as a sign to adopt. Our daughter's first birthday with us was her 8th. She had some emotional challenges that we worked through together, through honesty and patience. It felt like our family was strong and united. So when I got a phone call from the police 2 years later, I was extremely confused. I was at the grocery store with my daughter, and as far as I knew, my wife was working a shift at restaurant. The police informed me that she was at the police station, unharmed, but they wanted to ask me some questions. I was a little unsettled, and my mind raced until I got there. With our daughter under my sister's watch, the police started asking me questions like, when did you find out what your wife was doing? And how long did you plot revenge against him? All I would ask repeatedly, what is going on? Where was my wife? What happened? I had no idea what they were talking about, and after about an hour and a half of interrogation, they believed me. They verified that I was at the grocery store at the time of the attack on AP in his own home, while my wife was there having sex with him. He was stabbed by an intruder while he was in bed with her. The culprit was covered from head to toe and fled the scene. My wife was the one that called 911. I was terrified. I started crying uncontrollably. My wife cheated on me and experienced this traumatic event. Then I felt relieved that I was recorded at a different place during the attack, being the dedicated father I was determined to be. As I shopped for groceries, my wife was cheating on me. I felt so stupid, even though there was no way I could have known. Then the police told me this guy was in critical condition, and he was having an affair with more than 4 other women. My wife just happened to be there when someone else wanted revenge. They let me go, and I saw my wife waiting for me. She looked disturbed and restless. When she saw me, there was brief relief, followed by great sadness when she remembered she cheated on me. I walked right by her, refusing to speak. She followed me, crying and begging to talk about this. I told her we were over, and that I planned to start seeing other people immediately. I sarcastically told her she made an excellent choice for an affair partner, because he was very experienced. She admitted she was extremely stupid for sleeping with this guy, after they talked for about 2 months on a dating app, but that was all he would ever amount to in her life. She pretty much demanded that I forgive her because she was worth it, and we already spent so many happy years together. I told her she ruined everything, just before I slammed my car door and drove home. I called my parents and sister came over to help me through this time and try to make our home environment happy for my daughter. Within 24 hours, I filed for divorce. She tried to come home that same day and got into a fight with my parents when they refused to let her in. After some screaming, they actually managed to convince her to leave with just a few suitcases of her belongings. When our daughter saw her again, she told her she was very disappointed in her. Can you imagine that? Hearing that your 10-year-old adopted daughter is disappointed in you. After all we went through to adopt her and work through her emotional trauma, my wife let her down and made her a little less hopeful. That was enough punishment in itself, but my wife was obviously divorced by me, so she lost her home, and then she was also fired from the restaurant. I told our boss that we worked for the past 12 years what happened, and how our relationship ended in the worst way possible. She lied to me that day. She didn't have a shift to work. They decided this made her untrustworthy, and fired her for it. She was so deflated and disappointed in her life's new path that she didn't fight for her job, she just accepted it. She's still living at her parents' without a job or plans for the future. My daughter and I have been quite the opposite, just hopeful and keeping ourselves busy. Besides work and school, we go hiking, camping, sailing, and travel to fun destinations. OP, I don't understand how your wife didn't think of her husband or daughter before doing this, and stop dead in her tracks. I'm surprised every time I hear one of these stories that the spouse failed to have a moment of clarity, where they decide not to destroy everything they built with the person they claim to love. It's hard to believe these cheaters even have normal emotions, or might have understand what a relationship entails. They blow it, and once the trust and loyalty is gone, it's nearly impossible to recover. Things are never as they were before it happened, and it's always better to end the relationship. The emotional torment of staying together doesn't compare to the temporary adjustment of separation. At least in separation, there's newfound hope in the future, instead of worry and paranoia. I believe that you made all the right decisions, given your circumstances, and wish nothing but the best for you and your daughter. You're an inspiration to us all. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.